Anyway, you're going to get that notification. So here's the opening slide for the YouTube viewers that are looking at this. Again, this tells the story. So it also has your target glands listed down here as well. As we segue out of the anterior pituitary, we then look at the posterior pituitary and its connection with the hypothalamus, and really connection with the brain is through this neurohypothesis. And we really only see two major hormones with the posterior pituitary. The first one, and it's a biggie, is anti-diuretic hormone. So we abbreviated, of course, ADH. Anti, we know as a prefix, means against something, and diuretics have to do with the release of fluids. So urinating, in essence. So an anti-diuretic is going to help us to retain water. And a lot of times we definitely need to be retaining water, especially under conditions of extreme stress, where we've got a lot more friction going on with the heart, with the lungs, with other internal organs. We need to maintain that hydration. So ADH, this is a big one throughout Advance that we talk about for several weeks. So I do want to introduce you to it, or I have introduced you to it. ADH, anti-diuretic hormone. It prevents the formation of a large volume of urine. So it helps us to retain and conserve water. So it's going to have its targets all the way down in the kidneys. Okay. And then the other one we see from the posterior pituitary is called oxytocin. That's going to be a hormone that leads to some uterine smooth muscle contractions. Some of you pregnant and mothers who were pregnant who are now mothers, maybe you were having some contractions before you went to the hospital, and then you got to the hospital, and hopefully they kept going, and there's a rhythmic pattern, and that's that oxytocin levels going up. Sometimes when moms get to that end of the 40 weeks or so, and we're seeing some erratic contractions or contractions that aren't happening, maybe we can give Pitocin as the kind of the synthetic form of oxytocin. Many of you have probably heard of it. Maybe some of you have had Pitocin, but that's going to be the clinical form, in essence, that helps get those uterine muscles contracting and stimulates moving the baby along. That's part of that positive feedback mechanism. So that's it for the pituitary. Whew, we made it. That's a lot of pituitary talk. And again, I want to reiterate that the pituitary is the master endocrine gland. That's partially why we spent so much time on it. Those of you watching on YouTube, the video, again, let me back up real briefly and just to this slide. These are the main, what you missed was basically just looking at the main hormones of the anterior pituitary. We looked at growth hormone. We looked at TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, ACTH, and adrenal corticotropic hormone, and then the two gonadotropins, luteinizing and follicle stimulating. And we left off with prolactin from the anterior pituitary. All right, and then this is, I think, where the video recording started with this chart. So you can see, again, the hypothalamus controls and regulates and dictates what the anterior pituitary is going to do, in essence. What hormones is it going to release? Okay. And then we just did those. So we'll leave the P group. We did pituitary, now the pineal, also in the brain. Pineal is like pine cone, right? So it's got a pine cone shape. Part of the it's kind of behind the diencephalon, or just, and we haven't done diencephalon yet. So we'll talk about that next week. We'll look at the medulla, the pons, the midbrain. We'll look at the brain stem as it kind of comes up into the brain, and then we'll end enter into the diencephalon, that thalamus, hypothalamus. We just looked at that. But the pineal gland is just a little bit posterior to that. I don't think I have it. Here we go. So the pineal is going to sit right up in this area here. So this is the brain stem coming up here. Okay. This is the spinal cord, leads into the brain stem. And then this is the diencephalon area. And you can see the pineal gland just kind of nestled right back kind of between the cerebellum and the thalamus. The pineal gland is going to regulate a lot of our sleep and wake cycles. So we do see melatonin being involved with as the primary hormone of the pineal gland. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on that one. We do see that one a little bit later on in advanced. So then we get the everybody else group, right? So we spend all that time on the pituitary and the hypothalamus, and then we do the everybody else. So fascinating thing too about these glands is they're very centralized, so which helps, right? They're very protected for one as we go all the way down through, but not only that, the central pipelines of your blood, the larger pipelines, again, going to be right down the center. So we do see these endocrine glands being fairly midline. So another midline right in the throat area, the thyroid. We're going to see a couple of lobes with the thyroid. It only weighs about an ounce. It's not very, it's not a real, none of your endocrine glands are real heavy, I would say. I mean, maybe the adrenals are a little bit bulky, but your pancreas is very flimsy. The thyroid's fairly flimsy. So the tissue is just not, we're not talking about, skeletal muscle here. So anyway, we don't get a lot of weight from these. The thyroid, again, it has kind of a double lobe shape here. We got like a left lobe, right lobe, kind of the lateral lobe or lateral lobes. And then they've got this little, what they call the pyramidal lobe. Thyroid, okay, in the throat area. Now, it's going to be right, or you can see the larynx, which we haven't done. We're going to be doing the respiratory system here in a few weeks, but we'll talk a little bit about this region when we get to respiratory. But that's your vocal folds and your voice box. Okay, so it's just a little bit inferior to the voice box. The cells and tissue of the thyroid gland, I just really, of course, illustration on the left, actual image on the right. But as we've seen before, we said glandular tissue is typically cuboidal, typically simple. And so this is what we see, simple cuboidal glandular tissue. Okay, there are follicular cells or cells with little follicles. We have little microvilli, follicles. So that just means we've got little finger-like, hair-like projections. Oftentimes, again, that helps with the movement of the hormone or of the product. We're going to see three major hormones with the thyroid. We see one is just called thyroid hormone. Okay, so which is actually two hormones, what we call T3 and T4. Okay, so the main hormone of the thyroid is called thyroid hormone. However, it's really two hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine. We can see the word iodo, or the kind of combining form, just means iodine. So we do have iodine involved. Okay. So anyway, thyroid, T3 and T4, these have a lot to do with some of your basic metabolic principles. Again, we're not going to spend much time talking about hormone actions right now. We're really just focused on this is the gland, this is the hormone, or these are the hormones. So some of this kind of extra stuff, take it with a grain of salt for now, but know that next semester in advance, we do go a little bit further. This last bullet really gives you the basics. Again, we generally associate the thyroid with metabolic rate. Okay, cell growth, tissue differentiation. So its targets, the thyroid hormone targets, kind of like growth hormone targets, are all over the place. They're general. We have general target. Salute to general target, by the way. Anyway, calcitonin. Okay, calcitonin is the third. I guess third. We've got thyroid hormone, which is actually two, T3 and T4, and now calcitonin. Calcitonin is going to influence our blood calcium levels. When we consume calcium, calcitonin will get released and help to kind of bring some of that calcium level down and enable us to store calcium either in bone or muscle. Typically, we'd see it stored in bone. So calcitonin helps to tone your calcium. In other words, bring the calcium out of the blood and help to enable the storage of it in bone. We do have what are called parathyroid hormones. These are going to be 4, maybe 5 little tiny mini M&M size buggers that sit in a posterior aspect of the thyroid. So they're kind of connected with the thyroid. If we took the thyroid out and turned it around, you could see these little buggers in it. So Thursday, when we do our visible body work with the endocrine, we'll be analyzing that. By the way, and John, just so if you're still in here, the Tuesdays are kind of this is your info, and then Thursdays we work on visible body. You're welcome to come Thursday too if you want, but that's when we explore a little bit with visible body and break things down in that respect. So anyway, parathyroid, we'll see those little buggers in the posterior aspect of the thyroid. These release parathyroid hormone. Well, that's kind of nice. PTH, or parathyroid hormone, is going to be the opposite or the antagonist of calcitonin from the thyroid. So calcitonin comes from the thyroid. Parathyroid hormone comes from the parathyroid glands, and what they're going to do is pull bone out of or pull calcium out of bone when our blood calcium levels are too low. So muscles use up a lot of calcium to work, especially the heart muscle, right? It's constantly contracting. We need a lot of calcium, not just stored in bone. So when levels are low, we can pull stored calcium out of bone, and that's what the parathyroid hormone is going to do. So this little flow chart, again, this is more physiology stuff, so don't get too hung up on needing to know this right now. Just know thyroid produces 3 hormones, parathyroid produces 1. Thyroid's hormones are T3, T4, and calcitonin. Parathyroid hormones or parathyroid gland produces parathyroid hormones. So pretty good, pretty straightforward. Okay, calcitonin. Again, if I have high calcium levels in the blood, calcitonin gets released, and then we store that calcium in bone. If I've got low blood calcium levels, I can release parathyroid hormone. That's going to get some osteoclasts working and trigger some of that calcium to get released into the bloodstream. Okay. Moving on down the line, we then end up in the adrenal glands. We've got 2 portions of the adrenal glands. We mentioned earlier ACTH and adrenocorticotropic hormone. So we'll look at that coming up in a few minutes. But we do see the adrenal gland. Yeah, my pleasure, John. Have an awesome day today. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. So we've got the adrenal glands. We have, first of all, let me back up one slide. There we go. Let's look at the word adrenal. We see ad, AD, and we've seen this before, like adduct, bringing something together. So add always means towards something, okay? Adding to something. Renal, you guys probably already know, means kidneys. So adrenal, broken down, means towards the kidneys. We oftentimes see epi, meaning upon, and then nephr, epinephrine. Nephr also has to do with the kidneys. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that the name of these glands does give us a little bit of insight. I don't drink coffee. That's peppermint tea with hot cocoa and powder and cream. Yummy. Almost like coffee. 'Cause chocolate has a little bit of caffeine in it. Anyway, so we break down the adrenal glands into two sections, the cortex and the medulla. So we'll look at that coming up in just a second. But here we've got a kidney and then a little cap on top of the kidney called the adrenal gland. So cortex, when we pull that adrenal gland off and look at it a little bit closer, we see it is in two sections. And again, this goes back to some of our terminology from the first week or so of the semester. We saw medulla and cortex. Cortex is the outer shell. Medulla is kind of the meat in the middle. Medulla is the meat. Okay. So it's almost like two different glands in one, because the tissue of the cortex and the cells of the cortex are quite different than the tissues of the medulla and the cells of the medulla. So we're going to focus on the cortex. The cortex is where the adrenal cortical hormones are located, and these are what they call steroidal hormones. So we call those corticosteroids. You've probably heard that term at some point. A cortisone shot or cortisone cream. These are anti-inflammatory chemicals. So when we look at corticosteroids, we're looking at anti-inflammatory chemicals. So the body produces its own anti-inflammatories, so that's a good thing. We have a lot of friction with the heart rate and the blood pressure, so corticosteroids are our natural defense to kind of keep that in order. There are three different types of cells. I'm going to move to here we are. We have three zones of the cortex. And in each zone, you're going to have different hormones being produced by the adrenal glands. Okay. Mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and gonadotropins. So let's talk a little bit about those. The mineralocorticoids are going to be primarily, there's only one really that's relevant, and it's called aldosterone. And aldosterone, again, if you're just getting an introduction to these. So if pituitary had a bunch of stuff, okay, we're seeing adrenals now have a handful of things going on. Aldosterone is going to also help along with ADH. Okay, remember ADH from the posterior pituitary, that antidiuretic, help us retain water. Aldosterone is also going to do that. And aldosterone does it a little bit different way, but we still see the same effect happening. Once aldosterone gets released from the cortex of the adrenal glands, we're going to start retaining water. Okay, so that's the main mineralocorticoid. Okay, aldosterone. It basically causes your body to release potassium and retain sodium. So water always follows sodium. So if I retain sodium, water is going to follow it. So I'll retain water too. So that's kind of what aldosterone is doing. Okay, glucocorticoids. Let me back up. So the mineralocorticoids, this outer zone, the outer aspect of the cortex, that's where you're going to find aldosterone. When we look at the glucocorticoids found in the middle zone, that's where your cortisols are going to be found. Cortisol, cortisone, okay. Cortisol. And again, that's an anti-inflammatory chemical. This slide is called the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. You do not need to worry about this. This is big, big, big physiology stuff. And so you're probably already kind of neck deep with what we've been talking about. So I don't want to add another brick onto your load while you're still trying to tread water in the deep end with the load you already have. So I'm trying to kind of remove some of those bricks and then and pull you out of the water. So it may seem like it may not seem that that's what's going on, but anyway, so there's so much with the endocrine system in advanced A&P. So again, this is just your introduction to, these are the names of the main endocrine glands, and these are some of the hormones involved with those glands. We typically see cortisol being an anti-inflammatory chemical is going to increase when we're under stress. So cortisol levels go up when we're under stress. Why? Because there's more inflammation. Why is there more inflammation? Because the heart's beating faster, the muscles are moving more, the lungs are doing what they're doing. They're inflating and deflating at a faster rate. There's a lot of friction. There's a lot of heat. There's a lot of inflammation. So we want to retain some water. So ADH kicks in, aldosterone kicks in. We're going to see the kidneys with renin kick in, all in response to stress. Aldosterone and cortisol from the adrenal glands kicking in. Okay, to help us retain water and reduce some of the inflammation. Okay, and then gonadocorticoids, again, gonads in the word, so we must have something to do with sex hormones. So we do see some sex hormones coming from the adrenal cortex. All men produce a little bit of estrogen, and all women produce a little bit of testosterone. And the testosterone that women produce in small amounts is going to come from the adrenal cortex, and from particularly this zone, the zona reticularis. Okay. So that's the gonadocorticoids. You're going to have some androgens. Andro means male, so male sex hormones for females are going to come from that area. Okay, and then if we had the adrenal cortex, then we must have the adrenal medulla, which of course we do. The medulla is the kind of the meaty part in the middle, meaty middle medulla. So just remember all those M's. The adrenal medulla produces our primary stress hormones called epinephrine and norepinephrine. So we'll see these in response to stress. These are your fight or flight chemicals. So when you perceive the bear is chasing you, or maybe they're not chasing you, if you see the bear and then he is chasing you, or if you perceive that the bear is chasing you, right? Could go multiple ways. Stress hormones are going to kick in, and epinephrine is one of them. We're going to see this cascade of flow of hormones. That's why, you guys, chronic stress is so deteriorating to the body. One of the things we've seen throughout this discussion today is the hormones released from the brain, released from the neck or the thyroid, released from the adrenal glands with the kidneys, pancreas, we're going to see in a little bit. All these hormones are being released in response to stress. And so, if we're seeing more and more metabolic disorders in the clinic, we're seeing more and more people with imbalances of chemistry. And so illness, and especially chronic illness, is oftentimes due to chronic stress. Okay. So anyway, so that's, again, kind of the central theme really in advanced A&P is looking at how all these hormones and chemicals and neurotransmitters, how they all maintain or what their levels are during homeostasis, and then what happens when we're out of homeostasis to these chemicals and to these organs. And then anyway, it's the big teeter-totter of chemistry and homeostasis. So again, this is more stuff that you really are going to see extensively next semester. So let's move into the pancreas. The pancreas, so pituitary, anterior, posterior, pineal, thyroid, parathyroids. Okay, and then we just did the adrenal glands. So now we're going to come hover around the pancreas. The pancreas we're going to see as both exocrine and endocrine. So the pancreas has multiple different cell types depending on what the need is. So as an exocrine organ, it's going to be excreting into the ducts of itself and then ultimately into the digestive tract. As an endocrine gland, of course, it's going to be secreting directly into the bloodstream. So we do see several different types of cells. We look at the outer cells of so this is kind of a chunk of the pancreas, and we can see what are called acini or acinar cells. These are the exocrine cells. Notice they're just kind of cuboidal. These are going to excrete the digestive enzymes, proteases, and lipases that ultimately get secreted into the small intestines. So the rest of these cells are going to be responsible for the endocrine aspect. So we're going to see glucagon and insulin specifically. So we have what are called alpha cells and beta cells, delta cells, epsilon cells. So mainly, I need you guys to remember these first two for now. First of all, that the pancreas is both endocrine and exocrine. Its exocrine aspects, we're not going to see those till we get to the digestive system, so put that aside for now. The endocrine aspects are what we're focused on, and these are going to produce a couple of primary hormones to regulate blood glucose. So alpha cells produce glucagon, beta cells produce insulin. So if I have beta cell issues or alpha cell issues, it could lead to type 1 or type 2 diabetes, depending on what's going on and how chronic these issues are, and whether or not it's juvenile or type 1 diabetes, or whether it's type 2 adult onset, more lifestyle diabetes. Either way, glucagon and insulin are biggies for regulating blood glucose. Somatostatin, again, we saw somatostatin all the way up in the hypothalamus as well. So this helps to maintain some balance in the body. We'll skip this next one. The last one, though, ghrelin. I just want to make a quick statement about ghrelin. Think of your stomach growling. Ghrelin is an appetite. It's an appetite. It's a hunger chemical. So when your stomach is empty and your pancreas is getting the signal that, oh no, my stomach's empty, I need to release some stored glucose, so I need glucagon to come out. And so what also happens is ghrelin gets released, goes up to the brain, into your appetite areas of the brain, and starts like getting your stomach growling, getting your brain thinking about eating. So we can start to appease some of these aspects that are going on. So ghrelin is an appetite, stimulates your appetite. It's a hunger chemical. Get your stomach growling. Hey. And again, that's going to be all the way up in the hypothalamus. Okay, so glucagon increases blood glucose levels, and insulin decreases blood glucose levels. Okay, so if I have low blood sugar, glucagon is going to get released from the pancreas. It's going to go to the liver and get the liver to release stored glucose. So this, again, is an advanced physiology mechanism, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. High blood sugar level, then we're going to get insulin coming in to help remove some of that glucose. And then lastly, of course, the testes and ovaries. Well, not lastly, but in this section, we do have a couple more basics. We're in the home stretch. We're actually rounding third right now. We're almost ready to slide into home here. Testes and ovaries, again, this is birds and the bees. We spend plenty of time at the end of the semester with reproductive, but of course, these are endocrine glands as well. We think of them as producing testosterone and estrogen. There's a few other sex hormones or a few other hormones that the gonads do produce, but those are the main ones that we think about. The placenta produces a hormone called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. that's a mouthful. That's why we say HCG. But this is going to be what your pregnancy test kit is looking for, increased levels of HCG. So once fertilization and then ultimately implantation occurs, and then we start to get embryonic development, you're going to see increased levels of HCG. Now, if it takes maybe a good week or two for those levels to go up after fertilization. So if fertilization takes place today and I test HCG tomorrow, I may not see levels of HCG much different, because it does take a few days after fertilization to work for the zygote and ultimately the embryo to work their way down to the uterus. Once we get and start implanting into the uterus, that's when we're really going to see those numbers go up. So a pregnancy test will show higher levels of HCG typically within, I would say about 2 weeks after fertilization. Then you would get that positive test. Okay, and then one of the last glands we do is going to be the thymus gland. We think of the thyroid being in the throat, so don't confuse these two. We have to go a little further down, not much further, to get to the thymus gland. The thymus is going to be just above the heart, a little bit superior to the heart, so it just kind of sits right around that area in the mediastinum region, the thymus gland. And this is going to be a biggie when we talk about the immune system in a couple of weeks. So many of you have probably heard of T cells. So thymus is a biggie for immunity. One thing we know about the thymus is that it's very large when we're young, and it slowly deteriorates and shrinks with age. Okay. And then a couple of side notes. There are other hormones in the body besides just the ones we discussed. There are a few gastric and GI, intestinal mucosa hormones. Again, the stomach is going to produce something, release gastrin, secretin. We're going to see something called CCK. Again, these I don't need you to be too concerned with at the moment, but next semester we do jump into those quite a bit. And same with the heart. We do see the heart having a couple of hormones coming from the atrium. These are more like secondary roles. So the heart we don't consider to be a primary player in the endocrine system. So we will see ANH, which is the antagonist to ADH and aldosterone. So ADH and aldosterone help us to retain water. ANH is actually going to help us it's more or less a diuretic. It's going to help us eliminate sodium. So when you eliminate sodium, water chases sodium out of the body. So the N in ANH is for Na, which is sodium. Sodium is natrium in German. So ANH, natriuretic, natriuretic hormone, ANH, has to do with releasing sodium from the body, therefore releasing water from the body. So it has the opposite effect of ADH. Anyway, that's it. I am done with hormones for now. Thursday, I'm going to pull up a couple of items in visible body, but I'm probably going to start talking about, start getting into the nervous system a little bit more. The nervous system does take a good couple of weeks. It's a bulky unit or a bulky section. So I do want to make sure we have enough time. So endocrine is done. We're going to move into the nervous system on Thursday and continue with the nervous system next week. I believe we will spend at least 3 class sessions on the nervous system. So possibly 4. So anyway, starting Thursday, nervous system. Other than that, I don't have anything else for you guys. So have a great day today. I'm going to stop the recording.